Hello and welcome. Ukrainian forces deploy Marder IFVs from Germany as well as Strykers from the US for the very first time. This shows that they have deployed reinforcements, which immediately has led to some successes on the front line. We'll talk about this in this situational picture, as well as about the fighting at other parts of the front line, and about the event where Russia actually boarded a neutral ship in international waters. We'll talk about this in this situational picture. We'll start at the northern part of the front line here. The Russians claim they gained some positions south of Vilshana. They also say they had successes further east at Orlianka and Mykolaiivka. I cannot fully confirm that anything moved here. They claim they got into 7 kilometer distance from Kupiansk, which would be more or less here. And we even have the former deputy interior minister of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic, who claims that they are directly on the outskirts of the city. Now, obviously, we can say directly outskirts is somewhat up for interpretation. If you see Sinkivka as the outskirts, then probably it is. But that they are somewhere close to here seems to be absolutely ridiculous, at least as of now, unless there has been a breakthrough that wasn't reported in any serious source recently. We have reports of Ukrainian counterattacks here at Sinkivka and at Pershotravneve here. I cannot confirm that they achieved anything. The Ukrainians also attacked at Novoselivske, here in the direction of Kamasinivka, in the Sherebets bridgehead, and in the Serebryanske forest close to Dibrova. I do not see them having achieved anything here, so their counterattacks were unsuccessful. South of the Siversky Donetsk, we have both sides attacking at Bilohorivka. No changes in territory. Spirne is contested. The Russians were attacking here. No change in territory confirmed. And the concentration of fighting is south of Bakhmut, Klishivka and Andrivka. The Russians were attacking. We have a video here showing us Russian troops advancing. We see a T-90M and two BMP-3 attacking the southwestern part of Klishivka, which was recently liberated by the Ukrainians. As you can see, the autocannons of the BMP-3 hitting it and them storming this direction. The video was geolocated exactly here. Now you see this is the southernmost part of Klishivka. It's unclear here. It's unclear whether the Russians succeeded in taking it, whether so the current status is unclear. It might be possible that they successfully pushed the Ukrainians out, even though the Ukrainians still hold the high ground, which should allow them to strike attacking forces better, and which should make holding Klishivka more difficult. Before the Ukrainians captured the high ground, Russian military bloggers like Ryba were saying, as soon as the high grounds are lost, we will have no chance of keeping Klishivka. We'll have to withdraw. So far, it didn't happen. But the fact that they kept attacking despite the high grounds in Ukrainian hands seems to be one of the reasons we see this year. Several Russian tanks and IFVs abandoned and destroyed close to Klishivka. The video is fresh, so supposedly it was in direct connection. But obviously, there's always a slight chance that some of those videos are just published now or anything like this. This doesn't necessarily mean it was in a direct connection of this attack. Further south, we have reports about fighting around Avdiivka. No change in territory can be recorded. Marinka also fighting. No change in territory here either. South of Velika Novosilka, at the border between the oblasts of Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia, we have the Ukrainians advancing further south in Uroshaine and Staromayorsk. Ryba, the Russian military blogger, is showing that, according to them, the southernmost parts of both towns are, as they call it, the gray zone, which basically is the contested area where neither side has a permanent foothold in it. And they are saying that the town of Savitne Bashanya is under pressure. This is the attacks of the Ukrainians are continuing southwards, and with them controlling this, holding the area towards Novodonetsk will be more difficult too. as keeping up supply to these areas will be more and more challenging. Generally, observers expect Novodonetsk to be the next target and that it will probably fall fairly soon as its flank is increasingly being threatened. Now, while Riba is saying that both towns still are somewhat in Ukrainian hands, we have Voenko here showing us the map, and according to them, the Ukrainians control both towns completely. There were Russian counterattacks as well, but they were defeated, so the Ukrainians slowly advance further south here at Uroshaine and Staromayorsk at both towns. Further west, close to Orekhiv, we have some changes as well. First, we have the news that the northwest of Robotine in the forest area here, the Ukrainians were able to advance somewhat. And then we have this video here of shelling in Robotine. This is watched from the northeast. This should be the northern part of Robotine here. And this is the south. And you see some fires inside. And this building is being hit, which supposedly housed a Russian troop concentration, showing that the Ukrainians strike deeper into the town. What we see here again is Riba showing that according to them, at least parts of the town are now contested. Riba in the last situation report, I told you that Riba says they pushed the Ukrainians completely out of the town again. Now they admit that the Ukrainians have entered the town again. And we have them here saying, on the northeastern outskirts, Ukrainian detachments under cover of fire with cluster munitions are rolling into the village. So they are admitting that the Ukrainians are entering Robotine again. We have Wargonzo here reporting, and according to them, they are also moving towards the southeastern borders of the settlement in order to capture units of the Russian Federation armed forces. So according to Wargonzo, the Ukrainians somewhat are moving in this direction here to either envelop the Russian forces in Robotine or probably to make them, to force a turning maneuver on them, making the Russians abandoning Robotine to avoid being captured and encircled there in this regard. Now, while this is tactical maneuvering, we have an interesting video here. The more knowledgeable ones of you will immediately recognize the distinct shape of this IFV that is moving here at a fairly high speed and is getting attacked. This is actually a Stryker, a wheeled armored vehicle. In this case, probably an APC, but depending on the armament, you can classify it as an IFV as well. It was hit here. There are some claims that it was probably not seriously damaged as the video immediately cuts off. I'm not fully convinced of this, especially as the pure mass of it would keep it rolling for a few more meters and we don't see what happens afterwards. But nevertheless, whether or not it's being damaged, what we do see is not just this picture, but also this here. And this is the distinct form of the German Marder 2 IFV. Ukraine has received a fair number of them, and they are now being seen at Robotine. Robotine, that means that likely Ukraine has deployed the 82nd Brigade. It is equipped with 14 Challenger 2 MBTs, 40 Marder IFVs, and 90 Strykers. So not only do they send in fresh reinforcements that have not even been committed at all in this counteroffensive, we should also see the Challenger 2 making its combat debut, at least on picture, fairly soon here. In total, this already bore some fruit, as now the pressure upon Robotine is continuing to mount up and the Ukrainian side is slowly pushing forward. We have news, not really any news about the bridgehead over the Dnipro. By all means that I find, it still exists. I've found Russian military bloggers claiming that the Russian side managed to push out the Ukrainians out of the western part of Kosachi-Laheri, which would then mean that they have had to been in there before, meaning that the Ukrainians advanced into the town. From what I understand, the area more or less under Ukrainian control should be roughly this here. This is the Ukrainian bridgehead, and there is no waterway in between anymore. So should they be able to extend it here, should they bring in heavy reinforcements, they could advance further. So far, the Russians don't seem to take any serious attempt to push into there to destroy that bridgehead. So we'll have to keep watching in the future how it develops. What we do have, though, is a video from this area, and it's a Sukhoi 24M that is here over southern Kherson, and it's launching 2 winged bombs, as we've talked about a couple of times in the past. You see them flying off here. They are guided and can extend the range vastly outside, vastly further. And we've seen in the end that the Sukhoi is already turning away to stay outside of the range of the Ukrainian air defense systems, or at least to extend the range to move away in case it was fired upon. What we do have now is an interesting video. In the southern Black Sea, Russian armed forces, as you can see, are about here on this video, captured a neutral civilian ship. We see the Russian warship in the background, and here the helmet cameras of Russian Marines entering the ship, arresting, or at least making sure detaining the crew, I guess is the correct word. The correct term for this. We see the bridge crew here having their hands up and then moving down. They did control the ship, which was on its way to Izmail in Ukraine on the Danube harbor, the harbor on the Danube. The interesting part is I did not find any serious claim that this is against the prize rules. So from my understanding, Russia actually did what it's supposed to do here, because according to international law, in case of war, a nation that is involved in the war can, outside of territorial waters of either the enemy or inside of territorial waters of the enemy, obviously, but outside of territorial waters of neutral countries in open water, theoretically even in the Pacific and the Atlantic, any nation at war can board ships, control them, and in case they do transport military goods, any goods to help advance the war effort, they can sink the ship or they can capture the ship, take it as a prize, basically steal the ship, even if it's from a neutral nation. There are tons of historic precedents. For instance, the Japanese took a British ship, an English ship, in their war against China, and there were outcries where the British media was asking for war against Japan, as how dare the upstarts in Asia take over, that was 1895, take over an English ship. And in the end, the British Admiralty admitted that this is fine. Because the ship actually transported weapons for China. So what Russia did here was, I do not see anyone disagreeing with it who has knowledge in that field. What Russia did was actually what they are supposed to do. You are allowed to control ships, but you cannot simply sink them. They are allowed to go on board. They have to ask them to stop. If they don't stop, supposedly there were some warning shots fired, but as they cannot open fire unless the ship tries to force its way and not give in. Then they can check it. If they find that it carries any contraband, they can sink it or take the ship as a prize. But what they do have to do is make sure that the crew gets to safety. So they cannot sink it and not care about the crew, let it drown, which was always an issue with the U-boat warfare, obviously, as a submarine is too vulnerable on the surface and cannot take on board civilian crews. This was an issue in both world wars. But what we see here is the Russian actually doing that, and I do not see anyone disagreeing. So in theory, they could do the same in the Atlantic and in the Pacific, and the Ukrainians could do so as well. Interesting here that we've seen this. I cannot remember having seen anything in regards to the prize rules in any recent history. And finally, we have some pictures from the Army 2023 exhibition in Moscow, where in Russia, I think it was in Moscow, where the Russians showcased some captured equipment. It was to be expected that the Russians will do it. I would predict we next see those items while in front of the embassies of the nations that delivered them. And what we see here is the French AMX-10 RC. That's a reconnaissance tank, or you could probably call it a light tank too. It's very thinly armored, but has a 105mm gun. What we see here is a British Cougar MRAP, so a mine-resistant, ambush-protected armored vehicle that the Ukrainians often press into IFV role, even though it's not really made for it. One of them was captured here. What we see is the CV90 from the Swedish armed forces that was delivered. 40mm cannon. It's considered to be one of the best, maybe the best IFV in the world right now. And this is supposedly showcasing where it was hit when it was taken out. In the background, by the way, Ukrainian tanks and other items were there as well. Here we have, that should be a Patria from Finland and a Bushmaster from Australia. As said, not really unexpected. What we do not see, though, is an American Bradley or a German Leopard 2A6, where the Russians claimed they captured them by showcasing themselves walking around it, taking some videos. But there we see what I said here in the past. It's a difference whether you walk around it or whether you actually are able to pull that thing out to safety, put it on a trailer and drive it far away from the front line. And here clearly we can see that the Russians were not able to. And the areas where the Bradleys got knocked out, where the so-called Bradley parking lot was, where the Leopards were, all of this is under Ukrainian control now. So anything that wasn't completely destroyed there will be repaired fairly soon. That's it already from me for now. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment what you think about the current Ukrainian pushes towards the south. Do you think the Russian lines will crumble, will finally buckle after all those consistent attacks and after the Ukrainians rotating through different brigades? If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. That's already it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.